Good Thursday afternoon, everybody. I'm meteorologist Tim Pandajis here with your tropical update, and we have a lot to talk about. There's a lot going on, not only in the Atlantic, but still a named storm out in the Pacific. Areas that were yesterday investigative areas that we had talked about have now organized, strengthened a little bit to get tropical depression status, and that's 13 and 14, and they're well on their way to getting names. And the next names on the list are Laura, Marco, and then a area coming off the coast of Africa that's going to be designated as Invest 99L will likely get the name Nana, too. By the time the weekend's out, I'd say we're up to moderate chances between now and then of seeing that get named. Before we get into things more, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and if at the end of the video you like what you saw, you learned something, hit that like button as well, and you can find us all on our social media platforms, too. We put out videos like this almost every single day, and when there's named storms out there, multiple times a day. Where are we right now in terms of the overall hurricane season, June 1st through November 30th? We're over a third of the way through, and we're headed closer to the climatological peak, which is right around September 10th. Now, why that time? Well, that's the time of the year when all the environmental and atmospheric conditions are most conducive to support tropical activity. Today being August 20th, we're going to continue to ascend to that peak of September 10th before things slowly start to die on off as we get towards the latter part of the season and things end on November 30th. An overall broad look of satellite imagery on the Atlantic Basin. Well, there's three areas we're going to be talking about today, 1, 2, and 3, stretching from the Caribbean to the Central Atlantic to the coast of Africa. We'll start off with the one in the Western Caribbean, or the Eastern Caribbean right now. And this is Tropical Depression number 14. Yesterday, this was Invest 97L, and I'm showing you a 24-hour loop of the infrared satellite imagery. And what we look at when we use this filter on the satellites is the cloud top temperatures. Now, why is that important? When there are colder cloud tops, that tells us that the thunderstorm activity is more intense. It's higher up in the atmosphere, meaning it's stronger. When you see more of the blacks and the whites shading showing on up here, you see the flare up in the thunderstorm activity. Stronger thunderstorms are beginning to encircle that center here, and certainly can be seen from that 24-hour loop where yesterday it was kind of struggling. Now it's really getting its act together and well on its way to becoming a named system, probably either later tonight or by early tomorrow morning. Switching up that filter now, looking at the visible satellite imagery, you start to see a few characteristics show up here. The first of which is that outflow is beginning to become a little more evident. You can see the fanning out of the cirrus clouds. That means that the storm is starting to ventilate. We have inflow at the surface and then outflow aloft. That helps the storm to breathe effectively, to strengthen and maintain its overall development. And as this tracks off towards the west, it's going to be moving into much greater sea surface temperatures and overall more of a conducive environment. So this is strengthening rather quickly. Overall, the environment around it in terms of dry air and moist air, we're looking at water vapor imagery here. And dry air, really not a huge problem for this system. Dry air would be depicted by the yellow shadings on the map here. And yeah, there's some out there, but the mid-levels of the atmosphere are certainly much more moist than they were, say, a couple of weeks ago when we were dealing with that Saharan air layer. That's no longer really a problem. Now, in terms of the sea surface temperatures, these are cooking out there in this part of the ocean. And on its forecast track forward, I mean, it's moving into water temperatures that are in the mid-80s. We need 79, 80-degree water temperatures to support tropical activity, to have that heat transfer and using the heat to drive energy. But we got plenty of it. And even so, more so, as it heads into the Gulf of Mexico. It's like a bathtub out there in the upper 80s in some of these spots, and that ocean heat content too. We talked about this a little bit more in length yesterday, but what you're seeing here is the ocean heat potential. So I showed you earlier the sea surface temperatures. That's the skin of the ocean. The warmth in this part of the ocean extends down to, in some cases, over 100 meters. So why that's important is because tropical systems kick up the ocean, right? They mix things up. They cause waves. That's something called upwelling. And when the sea surface temperatures are warm, but they don't extend down to a depth, upwelling can mix up cooler waters below to the surface and effectively self-limit itself in terms of having more warm water to sustain more growth. So when you have ocean heat content like this, I wouldn't be surprised if this system really takes advantage of it here in the short term. Here's the official forecast coming out of the National Hurricane Center. We're going off the 2 o'clock advisory. This is the 11 a.m. track, though. And it's just going to kiss the coast of Honduras here before heading towards the Yucatan Peninsula. Now, you look at that and you say, oh, it's going to hit land, it's going to fall apart. This part of Mexico is relatively flat. Mountainous area would tend to tear it apart, shear it apart. And since it's moving rather quickly here, yeah, it'll probably weaken a little bit as it's over land. But between Saturday at 8 p.m. and Sunday at 8 a.m., yeah, it loses about 20 miles per hour in terms of its overall sustained winds. But then it's heading into extremely warm water. So overall, while a short-term weakening could be possible, once it enters the Gulf of Mexico, I mean, all bets are off there with that continuing to strengthen. And as we look farther out in time here, what could possibly happen by the time we get to Tuesday of next week? A lot of time between now and then, so this is not set in stone. You need to realize that. They could have a potential landfalling tropical storm, or maybe, if it takes advantage of the heat potential there, a hurricane anywhere from New Orleans to Brownsville in Texas. That is a large spread. That's one reason why the cone of uncertainty is called that. It gets larger with time because the uncertainty grows the farther out in a forecast period. What do the models say with this? Well, they're coming into more agreement than they were yesterday. This one, all these models here, each line, I should say, is a different computer model. We call this the spaghetti plots. You've probably heard that, seen that before on television. Pretty good consensus here that far out, heading up towards the Texas coastline. Meanwhile, the GFS Ensemble, which is the GFS model, the American model, run 21 times. Each of its members, we tweak it a little bit to change a variable or two to get a different outcome. And you can see here there's much more of a spread with the GFS Ensemble. Some of this keeping it over land and moving it a little bit farther south, while a few are in line with the other spaghetti plots that are farther off to the north and northwest. So we'll have to see how this plays on out. Overall, the European and GFS aren't handling the system all that well right now. Now let's jump over to our next system, Tropical Depression number 13. 2 o'clock advisory on this, 35 miles per hour. So a depression is up to 38 miles per hour in terms of sustained winds. Once you hit 39 or greater, you get that upgrade to a tropical storm and then a name as well. This is on its way there. We're only 4 miles per hour away, and it's looking a little bit better as once again we're looking at the infrared satellite imagery here. Overall, still a very large system, okay? Its moisture envelope is over 1,000 miles in diameter. We're going to need that to contract a little bit to get those sustained winds to jump up a little bit, and that's likely on its way to happening as it's moving off towards the west here. Had a similar scenario with Isaias. You remember how large that system was? At one point, it was like 1,400 miles in diameter. This is just over 1,000, so it's going to start to contract as it moves towards the Leeward and Windward Islands. Visible satellite imagery here, yeah, you can certainly see an evident spin in the atmosphere here. It's a tropical depression. It's going to tighten up a little bit, get that center to move a little bit farther to the north, take advantage of the very warm sea surface temperatures, and we'll see some growth here as we head through the next few days. Water vapor imagery on this as well, having to contend with a little more dry air than what we're seeing with 14 just off towards the west there. So see the yellows indicating the dry air, kind of even trying to get entrained into the overall circulation there. So that could halt it for just a little while. But its forecast track forward, again, into very warm ocean waters. And I mean, really anywhere in the Atlantic this time of year, you have ocean waters that are certainly warm enough, and you can see it as it tracks here north of Puerto Rico. Potentially by the weekend, it's going to have plenty of that warm water. So here is the official track from the National Hurricane Center. Right now it says a track north of Puerto Rico and Hispaniola is most likely, based on what we see in terms of the computer models. Certainly a track farther to the south could bring it up and over Hispaniola. Areas that don't deal with rainfall, lots of it, very well. Also, this would mean the structure of the storm could be in jeopardy as it's encountering the highest mountain peaks in the Caribbean over the Dominican Republic. If that center tracks over it, it's game over for a little bit. If it stays to the north, it'll likely stay intact and take advantage of very warm ocean waters here near Trinidad and Tobago, and as it heads into the Bahamas as well. Further out in time here, this is a little bit more worrisome. This shows potential of impacts in the United States as a Category 1 hurricane, potentially Key West, Miami area, and then emerging into the Gulf of Mexico and potentially a secondary landfall somewhere along the Gulf Coast. Once again, I want to stress, this is far out in the forecast term. This will almost definitely change either off to the north, northeast, or shift farther to the south. So even though most of Florida is in the cone of uncertainty right now, the confidence this far out is quite low and will change. And I have a perfect example of how to show you this. We're looking at the GFS Ensemble again, like we saw with Tropical Depression number 14. Pretty good consensus here in the rather short term, right? They're clustered together, all of the members, along or just north of Puerto Rico. But then as we go farther out in the future, look at the spread. We're anywhere from the Outer Banks in North Carolina to Brownsville in Texas. That's 1,400 miles. Literally the entire Gulf Coast and most of the southeast coast of the United States could, based on this run of the GFS ensemble, see some impacts from what could be either Laura or Marco. This is why that length, that far out in the forecast time frame, is low confidence. We need to see this cluster much, much more before high confidence is given to that forecast. So really have to watch this one closely. Here's the other spaghetti model showing a little bit more consensus here, but certainly more of a spread farther out in time, anywhere from the Gulf of Mexico to the east coast of Florida in terms of these models there. Going off the National Hurricane Center forecast right now for this system, in terms of tropical storm force wind probability, we could see some winds up to near 40 miles per hour, even though those chances are quite low, 20 to 30% chance through Puerto Rico, but then stretching out all the way to Florida, the southern tip of Florida, this far out in time, those chances are already up to around 50%. So certainly bears watching here as we go through the next couple days. Now our third system. This is likely going to be called Invest 99L. Right now it's just being referred to as a tropical wave, but the chances are growing each advisory that comes out. We're now up to moderate chances, 40% within the next 5 days, that this wave continues to take advantage of the very warm sea surface temperatures and overall conducive environment as it tracks along the open and very vast Atlantic Ocean and tracks westwards. Now, you may be wondering, why are we having all of this uptick in activity? Yeah, sure, we're getting close to the climatological peak. That helps. But also there's something called the madden-julian oscillation. And really, in short, what this is, you can read all this text here if you want, but in short, this is a large-scale rising motion in the atmosphere. And it oscillates. So there's an enhanced phase and a suppressed phase. In an enhanced phase, that rising motion takes that warm, moist, tropical air, forces it to rise, and we get the thunderstorm activity, which in turn starts to develop tropical systems, depressions, storms, and hurricanes. So when you have that large-scale rising motion, that kind of juices up the atmosphere to give that extra oomph to have some development occur. And so we're seeing that enhanced phase entering the Atlantic basin, and it takes around 30 to 60 days to oscillate through to the suppressed phase. What's going on out in the Pacific? We have one storm still. Genevieve was a Cat 4 monster just a few days ago, now down to a tropical storm, a high-end tropical storm with winds of 70 miles an hour. Moving along the Baja of Mexico, of California there, and it's heading off towards the north and the northwest. It will be falling apart, though, as it does so. Much colder sea surface temperatures up there, so we'll start to see it really disintegrate. All right, that's the latest. Long video, I know, but I hope you enjoyed it. A lot going on, a lot to talk about. There'll be many more videos to come in the next few days as we continue to watch both of those tropical depressions as they become named. You can find me on all my social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. We'll see you tomorrow.